Hey, deserving listeners. So, Berto, emails and other stuff. Let's get into it. What do you say?
Let's do it.
So, listener Ray, he emailed in through the website and said, could you talk more about the idea of solving toxic masculinity by emphasizing positive masculinity? You said before that while toxic masculinity is a problem, we shouldn't simply call everything associated with masculinity as bad, and instead focus on the subjective aspects of masculinity that are perfectly healthy and non-harmful. As much as I support the overall sentiment, even as someone who would rather encourage people based on more intrinsic motivations, I feel like it sort of overlooks the fact that much of masculinity itself is rooted in the concept of status and the need to maintain one's status in a hierarchy, as well as looking down on other men that behave in ways that could be perceived as unmasculine in order to affirm their own status. That men must constantly prove to themselves and others that they are masculine, and any little slip-up that could be perceived as unmanly, girly, or gay is not only a blow to their masculinity, but to their worth as a person, which is why I'm concerned that even with an emphasis on so-called positive masculine traits, that people could still judge others for not behaving in ways that they personally consider as masculine. What is your response to this? Berta, before I throw to you, I want to say this is one of the most well-written emails I've ever received. But Berta, what do you think?
Yeah, so this one's close to my heart because I'm a male. Well, so I don't think I was following, but then it almost makes it sound like the question is, should all male things be not good? I don't agree with that. If I misunderstood, that totally my mistake. But if that was the inclination, was to say, well, because of those tendencies, but then I would just say, look, heck, animals have tendencies to be selfish about their species and just survive. And even within that, animals, especially humans, or including humans, have a tendency to be selfish and just let their little community survive, and then their family survive, and then just them survive. So all those traits are bad because that's what leads to war, that's what leads to infighting, that's what leads to patterns like theft and all these things. So we need to suppress all human instincts and human traits. That's not workable or fair. So I would say no. I think there are a lot of things that we could debate, how much of it is society, how much of it's just built into being an animal, that is not healthy and constructive in today's society, that we should help us all grow out of and learn how to teach kids not to be and all these things. But there's a point at which you're still going to be who you are, and you're still going to be human, and you're going to have a certain identity for yourself, and suppressing that beyond a certain point, I think, is also not healthy.
Yeah, well, to me, what was your name again? Ray, I would say that I totally understand that it sounds like to you, the associations with masculinity are most, if not all, negative, given our awareness, our rather recently emerging awareness as a society to these aspects of masculinity. And everything you said is accurate. But what it denies is, for me, there are clearly positive aspects of masculinity that are present and can be used in toxic ways, but can absolutely be used in positive and non-harmful ways, which I'll get into in a second. But so there's that. And the idea here is not rejecting or suppressing humanity. It is deprogramming the cult-like indoctrination into gender associations that every society engages in. The Americans, mainstream Americans, have their own particular version of it, but Colombia has a version of it. There are countries around the world that have, Japan has a different version of it. You don't have to be a genius to know that by watching anime or other kinds of, Japan pop music, to know that their idea of masculinity, what's attractive, is considered different. There's different kinds of associations. So every society has it. There are some overlapping things, but it's an indoctrination, and we are tasked, people, all of us, regardless of gender, with deprogramming ourselves, getting support around that, and making choices about how we want to identify and what traits of our identity we want to hold on to and cultivate, and also reward others with, value, and which we want to actually call out. So, for example, a list that I have here that I just randomly typed up of positive masculine traits are, for the following list, there's the good, bad, and the ugly, if you will. So, honor. This isn't to say that it's not a feminine trait, but it is one of the ways in which men have been taught, boys have been taught, is to be honorable. And what does that mean? Well, on the bad side, you have someone that fights everyone because there's some question as to whether or not someone is questioning your honor or your integrity.
There's the extreme honor killings that happen where someone's like, "You besmirched my family honor. I will murder you even though you're my daughter."
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But the good side of honor is that you value being honest, you value doing the right thing, you stand up for others, you have pride in your identities while not disparaging others, you follow through with your promises, you say what you mean and you mean what you say. Those are absolutely masculine traits. You think about a cowboy on a ranch or something, a good cowboy. And probably played by that. What's that? Sam, the mustache
voice and the mustache.
Yeah. You think about him, and it's just like, hey, I do what I say, and I say what I mean. And so, if he were to say, hey, I will be there to help you in the hospital, I will drive you to the hospital when you need to have that procedure done or something. That they will show up. That they will be there, and that. They will do whatever it takes to help you. That is what I again, it's not like women don't have that, but when I have that kind of value and when I step into that place and when I make choices around that, I feel masculine, or I feel like I'm being, you could also just say you're being a good human, which is also possible. You don't really have to, you can make choices as to how you frame it. But if you want to frame to masculinity, and I actually do, I identify as masculine, and thus the things that I've been taught. So another quality is courage. So the bad side is that you are dangerous, you risk things too much, and you're insecure, so you're always trying to show that you are courageous and risk-taking, or you put other people down because they're afraid, that kind of thing. On the good side, you are courageous enough to cry in front of other people. You're courageous enough to being willing to take scary tasks. Like in my house, when there are spiders and bugs and such, early in my life, I grew up in a basement in the woods. You couldn't see any houses from the house that I lived in. We lived on a small lot, but there were a lot of woods. And we were in a kind of a valley, not a valley, but a hole, a moist hole in the Pacific Northwest with a lot of rain. And there were a lot of bugs. And so I was in the basement, and bugs were just such a part of my life. I would wake up with centipedes walking across my chest, and it wasn't a thing. This is bugs. So for me, it's that. But bugs can be a little concerning. But at a certain point, I said, I want to be the man. I'm not going to put other people down. I'm not going to require my wife to be afraid of bugs. But when there's a bug, I feel like I'm helpful, I'm useful, and I feel good about myself in terms of my masculinity by taking care of the bugs and being completely fine with getting down and dirty with whatever comes our way.
I've told this story before that I used to be terrified of spiders because, a lot of people are, but also I had this very scary, vivid dream when I was 5 that I was trapped in a
web. Were there a lot of bugs in Bogota?
This was in New York.
Oh.
Yeah.
Cockroaches, I guess, right?
Cockroaches. But spiders, I think there's a natural primate fear of spiders. And as kids, you also see a lot about scary spiders. Anyways, I was having this dream, huge, gigantic spider. I was trapped in this web with a huge, gigantic spider. And I woke up in the middle of the night and there was a spider on my pillow.
Oh, right.
I freaked out to kingdom come. My dad came running in. He thought someone was breaking in. And I was 5, so this left an indelible mark. I was traumatized. I hated spiders.
Yeah, legit trauma, right. PTSD kind of developed.
And that kept going into my 20s and stuff. And then I was at a house party one time, and I was talking to a gal, and all of a sudden there was a spider on the wall or on the kitchen counter, and the gal freaked out, oh God, and it was kind of big. And something clicked into me, or clicked in my head. I'd I need to be the man. And by the way, full disclosure, every time before this, I was like, someone else please handle this. But in that moment, I'm like, I need to handle this. And I grabbed a glass. I didn't say anything. I just put it on the thing. I grabbed a piece of paper, took it outside, let it free. And from there on, I was cured. Mm-hmm. I am now the person that if there's a spider, I will go grab it. No problem.
So you also don't put other people down about spiders. You don't laugh at guys.
I've been there.
if they're afraid of spiders. Yeah. So you don't adhere to the bad side, but you adhere to the good side. And tell me, does it add extra weight to the value or the meaning or the pleasure or whatever to be able to step into the identity of positive masculinity for you in those moments?
Yes. And by the way, because there's part of it that sounds like, oh, I have to save this damsel in distress. It actually had some to do with the fact that she was a female, because that dumb male part of me was like, I need to impress. Mm-hmm. But before this, I had a roommate who was a female, and I lived with two dudes and this gal, and both of us were terrified of spiders, and she was always the one to handle it. It's not the same person, it's a different. And she was always the one to handle all these spiders. And we were always like cowering in the corner. So it's not just like a male-female thing. In that moment, that dynamic helped me process my fear and be like, I will step up. Mm-hmm. But did it make me feel like I had conquered something? Yes. Mm-hmm. And did it make me feel like, okay, I have a role to play in this society that you can call it masculine. I can see the gray zone, because it's like, it could be feminine too, but I felt like, yes, now I am someone that can handle the scary spider.
Well, maybe even specifically, were you hoping that she would see you as masculine and as at least possessing one of the good qualities of masculinity?
I guarantee you, even though it was in a split second, I guarantee you my brain calculation was, overcome fear equals woman-like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and beyond that, after that point, it helps us. Like when there are tasks around the house that, what was I doing today? I was doing something, and I thought, Stacy could do this, but it feels good between us that I can do this as a man, and she can receive the service.
Okay. So I'm going to add some nuance here, because like in my relationship with my wife, there are things that traditionally would be considered like, well, that's the man's job that she does, right? And there are other things that might be traditionally considered the woman's job, which I do. And it's not an even split. It's all over the place.
Oh yeah, me too. I clean most of the toilets in the house. Which I say that, but at least in my household, where I was growing up, my mom was the one that cleaned things.
I grew up in a house with two grandmas, my grandma and her sister. I didn't have to lift a finger until my dad would say, like, you got to do the dishes or something. So traditionally, I was raised in a very machismo society like that. But I'm actually saying that I feel masculine when I play a role that's consistent and helpful in our household, whether that is doing the dishes or taking out the garbage, or doing my own laundry and all these kinds of things.
So these things change, and we can change them ourselves. Right. So, for example, the thing I was saying about being courageous enough to cry. Now, if you look at it in a simple way, crying is associated with women, right? And not associated with men. But if you really think about it and understand the facts that humans cry, and it has nothing to do with gender, that in reality, the real men would be courageous enough to cry.
And that it can be helpful to the community and your family and your other friends. And
Right. You're actually leading the way. You're like, George Washington across the Delaware. You're a brave leader who is showing others how to be healthy. It's a big deal.
I think because there is a association with crying about, oh, you're crying, so you're no longer helpful in this moment. You stand over there in the corner and cry. Whereas there is a way to cry while remaining part of the society. What I'm trying to say is, think about the association that we grew up with, and still in a lot of media, is at the point that I'm reduced to tears, I'm basically a no-op. It's like, okay, I'm just like over here crying in a corner or something. And the people that are not crying are going to save the day or finish the job.
No-op?
A no operation. Like basically, you're not helpful right now.
Is that newspeak?
I don't know. I just
like synergy.
It's computer. I know. I think it's computer speak.
Okay.
And like if you like computer stuff, you might be. But so if you're doing that crying, that's fine. Even if we don't judge you, you're still not going to be the one that finishes the job. We're the ones that are not crying. We're going to be the ones that finish the job. Whereas you can imagine the George Washington speech. I don't know why I'm using George Washington because you mentioned, but it's like where there's still a tear and he's like driven to tear, but he's still going to fight and he's still part of the operation.
After the battle, he sees a lot of dead
and
comrades.
He shows that emotion.
And he cries and he speaks to the crowd and he breaks down. And
in other words, just because you cry doesn't mean you're now helpless.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're now not able to do stuff.
Also, if you cry to the point of helplessness, that's also fine and normal and human.
Right.
And depending on the situation. So,
well, because it's not permanent. You're not now permanently the person who cries.
So another aspect of positive masculinity is usefulness, right?
Yeah.
Being helpful, being of service and assisting others. When the grandma is carrying a bunch of things out of the grocery store and I offer to help and she lets me help, I feel simultaneously like a good man. Not that women can't do that, but I feel like it is my role. Like you're on the bus or you're somewhere where you're sitting down and, an elderly person who looks like they might want to sit and there's no seats. I feel extremely responsible for getting up. Now, there can be certainly a lot of women that would feel very responsible for that.
So this is such dicey territory because I know that people right now are throwing their remote controls at our non-existing television that we're on.
I don't know.
No, because we're using these terms of like what's good masculinity. But here's the thing from my perspective is take strength. And this is a controversial one. But look, in my household, it is a fact.
Physical strength.
That physically, at 5'11", I am stronger than my wife physically.
Yeah.
And hence, I feel a responsibility to do certain things when they are needed. So a good use of my masculine strength, over strength or whatever, is to, I will carry that box. I will do that jar lid. A bad use of my masculine strength is beating my wife or using strength to intimidate my children or using, you see what I'm saying?
Or she wants to lift something on her own and you don't let her.
No. So the point is, these are realities. And there are, like you said, dark and light. And you can use your strength for dark, or you can use your strength for light.
The other part of the identity that I would be satisfying in myself is being, I guess there's a few. One is to be a good society member. I identify as someone who fits well within society, someone who is mindful of harmony within society. Like when I'm driving on the road, I think about, even if someone is not doing the right thing on the road, I'm like, well, but I have to think about everyone around me. And some people might be going through something today, or that they might have some impairment that makes it a little bit harder for them to see the road, that kind of thing. And so I want to fit in when I'm at the grocery store. We all have to work together. And so I satisfy that identity as someone who is socially minded and harmonious. It was a Japanese thing. I don't know. Maybe that's another part of it. And I also step into the identity of being a good grandson. In my family, it was, my role, particularly because I was a large child, tall and a big part of family get-togethers was just like, well, get the strong boys in here and they'll lift us, and then you feel useful, and they get you to cart shit around. You know what I mean? It's a win-win for everybody.
So I think you're touching, like if I were listening to us, I think one of my frustrations would be that some of your examples, like you admitted, are just things that humans should do. Not male and female, like everyone should do.
But I also think that identity and meaning play a role. Like I was identifying these other identities that I identify with, not just gender-wise, but also society-wise and family-wise, that add an extra layer of satisfaction when I am doing those things.
What I think some people are getting at, though, like maybe the writer, the caller, is that take the desire to fight, like physically or literally physically, or in a car with guns or in a plane with guns. The desire to fight is historically quite a masculine thing in our human society, right? How much of it is learned, how much, I don't care. It's just seen that way, right? So that's one way they say like, yeah, that's a thing that we should quell, right? Okay. But I would argue that, okay, but that's one example of the desire to fight does raise competitiveness. And that competitiveness has given yields. It has led to advancements. It has led to discoveries. People that, because of some of that feeling of, I need to be the best physicist or the best mathematician or the best warrior, have led to positive outcomes.
Yeah, it's all just language, but you could argue it's not the urge. What is the urge to fight exactly? Is it dominance and dominance over? And are you saying that some innovators might have that motivation? Okay. But another angle to this is what I was saying, usefulness and being the breadwinner, right? That you are taking care of your family, you're doing your duty and being responsible and thinking ahead so that everyone is fed and has a roof over their head. That's a traditionally masculine role. And one could innovate for that reason, right? Or they want to be seen as smart, or
right. Yeah, I certainly don't mean that fighting is the only one. There is, but the caller was saying dominance, right? A hierarchy. I want to be better than that person.
Right.
That has all of these have the dark side and the light side. What I'm arguing is that even some of those that sound like competitiveness.
Well, I wouldn't say dominance is the masculine trait. I would say that's the dark side of and again, it's just linguistics, but I would say that the masculine trait is one of being useful or respected or something like that. And if you don't have a way of gaining that through positive ways, or you've been taught negative ways, then you will try to dominate because you're insecure.
But if we're talking only in modern terms, like very modern terms, sure. But if we're talking about humans that have barely evolved in the last million years, violence and dominance via violence was a number one tool used by humans.
Still is.
It still is. And what I'm trying to get at is I'm defending even that to some extent, as there are light side of the force consequences.
Yeah. So, getting back to being a good grandson, my dad and my grandma, she died at the age of 101 about 5 years ago-ish. She was a very small woman, 5 foot, Japanese American, and 85 pounds. I mean, really, really small, and yet she could eat giant amounts of food and was constantly eating like potato chips and kimchi and natto and rice.
The highest metabolism.
Yeah, she just was constantly eating all the time.
Was she always moving around though, like doing a lot of stuff?
No. I mean,
because that's my grandma, although she doesn't eat that much, but yeah.
And just anyway, so very small. And my dad told me about this time when he was on a airplane with her, and she doesn't travel much, and the guy behind her was this big white guy, and some sort of upsetness happened, and he was yelling at my grandma. And my dad described how he rose to the occasion. I don't remember exactly what happened, but every once in a while.
And your dad's not someone that when you meet your dad, it's not like, oh, that dude gets in fights.
No.
He's the nicest individual you would ever meet.
He was full Japanese American growing up in Spokane, Washington in the 1940s
so he had to learn
40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And had to get, there were scraps.
Yeah.
And he had to learn.
That's like my uncle.
There's a line where it's just like, I'm nice and I'm polite and I'm honorable and I'm maybe even a little reserved, but you cross a line and it's go time. And my dad even told me this when I was young. He's just like, if someone crosses a line, you do everything you can, but once they cross the line, it's go time.
Duty.
Yeah. Well, you have the right to get down and dirty, and there's really no rules to fighting. He would really teach me a lot. It's like when you're on the ground, like you scrape, you bite, you kick, you do anything you can to win, and to get out of the scrap. But anyway, so and along these lines, I remember because on my white side, my grandparents had a cabin on the lake in Idaho, just near Spokane. and it was just around the corner from the KKK headquarters
Oh my God.
of like the Western United
crap.
States. So, it was a huge compound, very well known in Idaho. And when we were at the cabin, we didn't really see anyone, so it didn't matter. But when we'd have to go into town for one reason or another, there's a concern that we might run into actual KKK members.
There's a non-zero chance you would.
Yeah. And I'll never forget one time my dad sat us down. He's like, okay, we're about to head into town. And, I don't know what he said, but the vibe I got was there might be violence and you might see dad kick someone's ass.
Yikes.
And if that happens, like, get to safety, but don't be concerned if dad has to throw down.
Right.
And I just remember like, huh? And, and I just always, my dad, even though he's not a large man,
and like I said, he's the nicest guy you'll ever meet.
but when I was young, I just thought he was Superman. He had gigantic forearms. And anyway, so this vision of my dad and my grandma in the the airplane will flash through my head sometimes, and I will have a rage.
Right.
And I'm like, God help whoever, when my grandma was alive, if I'm there, I mean, right now, would my, my cousins who are women, do they feel the same way? Now, maybe some could.
Yeah.
Does my sister feel the same way? I don't think so. And what is that? I think it ties into this meaning that I have of being a male grandson that carries a weight and a responsibility, and I want it. I think I'm a good person when I am in that zone. I feel like it's a chance, I guess, as I speak out loud, it's a chance for me to prove to myself that I have worth. That's what identity is, right? It's like when people say to be proud to be an Asian American or something, it's you identify with it, and if you are careful and contemplative about your identification in positive versus negative, shadow versus strength, then you can really use it as a way to enhance meaning in life and other people's lives. And if you're not mindful, you can use it for a lot of really hateful, horrible things that we see in our society.
Yep.
And the last two, just really briefly, positive or masculine traits that can be bad or good. Assertiveness, bad. You are mansplaining. You talk over women. You're bothering people. But there's a good side, which is that you stand up for yourself and other people, that you're not afraid to speak up when injustice is happening. And leadership is another masculine trait. Of course, women can absolutely lead, but we were taught as boys that men can be leaders, and men who do lead are considered maybe more masculine, maybe. But on the bad side, it's dominance, it's putting other people down, it's being bossy. On the good side is that you are collaboratively building a vision. You've often said to me that one of the compliments that you'll give me, which I find to be very surprising, but I'll take it, surprising in that I wouldn't think anyone would say this about me, is that you would say I'm a good leader. You've said that. It's just like, the thing that I respect about you is that you're a good leader. And I'm like, good leader? That sounds kind of bad because it sounds like I'm bossy. It sounds like I'm constant because, we're best friends. So how could I be a leader?
But think about how you've described, because, okay, for example, we've been out and about, especially back in our old days, where you would probably, I don't know if you would, but I would self-describe myself as a good, fun leader when we're out and about, right? Like, let's go, right? And so there's positive and negative. I could get us into trouble. I could go be like, let's go steal some tires or whatever. But there's positive. But what I'm getting at with you when I say that is that you are, because a leader isn't just about a pretty speech or something like that, right? It's showing by example. And you show a lot of stuff by example. And it makes people like me and others be like, oh, like you're one of the good influences in my life. It's like, oh, wow, I could really learn a thing or two from this leader, right? You don't sit there barking orders at people. I don't mean that. That's actually not necessarily good leadership. But you're right that normally when we think of leaders, like, follow me into the breach. Now, that said, you kind of also do that, right?
Yeah.
Like you were like, hey, let's follow me into this podcast breach or whatever. And we also have done co-leading stuff, and it's not easy to do. Not everyone can, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. So when I hear that from you, and when I frame it that way in my head, which you have given me that gift, it adds I just feel as a human being that feels good to be able to be good at that, or to be successful in some of the endeavors along those lines. But there's another layer to the enjoyment and the meaning and the purpose, that I can also satisfy my need to be masculine, to be a good man.
Sure.
And, I can associate my success or efforts or being seen that way as also having worth as a man. If I wasn't able to do that, would I have no worth? No, of course not. So that's why we all have to, you just have to, for me, this is for me, and I recommend that other people do this as well, that you recognize that it's a construct and it's not real. And two, recognize that you can't do anything about having been indoctrinated, at least partially into it. And it's hard. It's really hard to just completely get rid of in your head. So you have a choice. You can either continue to try to get rid of it and really just go wherever you want to go, and don't identify, like I said, I identify as a grandson, as a son, as a husband, as a man, as a Japanese harmonious part of society, Japanese American. And, like when I have spam musubi, or I eat other Japanese food, like Stacy had some friends from out of town come over, and we didn't know what to serve for dinner. And I suggested that we get some Japanese takeout, and it felt good to be able to, because they didn't have a lot of familiarity with Japanese cuisine.
So introducing them to that.
Yeah. And I felt better about my Japanese American identity. But I could easily not identify as Japanese American, as I'm half white. I'm also fourth generation, so it's a little diluted by this point. But I want to. I like to. It makes me feel connected to my roots. It makes me feel connected to my family. It gives me meaning, gives me purpose. It makes me distinctive in a certain way. It gives me a direction,
By the way, just like with what we're talking about, and I'm not just saying this about Japanese, Colombia, whatever ancestry you want to point to, there's good and bad.
Yeah.
So you can embrace the bad things, or you can embrace the good things.
Yeah. I mean, being American, white American, and being Japanese, I come from two of the most imperialistic, horrific invader countries and societies of all time. Now, my Japanese ancestors left Japan 30, 40 years before they invaded. Well, that's not exactly true. Japan had been committing atrocities, but the main atrocities were in the 30s. And
but you're not embracing those aspects.
No. So, but it is interesting, to think about, right? I don't know. I've been furthering my understanding of this concept, and I feel like I took a bit of a step forward in today, kind of speaking out loud about it. Did you develop anything today?
Yeah, actually, because it's a language about how to talk about it. Like I said, there's part of it that is just like, what does it mean to be a good human? And things have changed because they've changed for good. Like when we say, leadership is a male, like, lots of my bosses in the last 15 years have been women, and my boss's bosses have been women. Mm-hmm. So I think at least in some industries, that's changing. And for good, obviously. But so but at the same time, I think it is still valuable for, like you were saying, for identity, for my identity, to be able to speak about what are the things that I like to emphasize about my identity in a positive way, even if they were traditionally seen as potentially negative or whatever. Like, how can I use those for good? Mm-hmm. And so, that gives me some language to talk about.
And it's to me, the advancement I've made today is that it's an acknowledgement of what the hand we were dealt in our society by being indoctrinated into it for so many years prior, that you just have to accept that you have internalized a lot of the messages of identity, whatever that is. And like I said, I guess you kind of have two general choices, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to come up with this. You can either go on a path of really dismantling that, and maybe even identifying with a different identity than the identity that's been foisted on you by society, and or you have to really contemplate and evaluate and scrutinize the messages that you have internalized and use the good ones, because it's easier to allow the internalizations to exist than to try to get rid of them completely. You know what I mean? And so it's easier to get rid of only some of masculinity than to get rid of the whole model altogether. But anyway, let's take a break, and we get back. More questions. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
So I also want to make a couple announcements here, Berto. So
Drum roll.
We are, you and I, having our 15th podcast anniversary.
But we just had our 10th anniversary.
Yeah.
How's that possible?
September 16 and 17,
Yikes.
2023. We are going to live stream for 15 hours. We're going to break it up into 7.5 hours each.
Yes.
And so join us on September 16 and 17 on YouTube Live. And every hour we go through a routine, if you will. Well, actually, I guess we might do like 7 hours and 8 hours or something like that.
Right.
So if you want to send your cards, postcards, packages, fan art, I love receiving hand copies of fan art. You can send it to, though this address is on our website, but you can send it to Psychology in Seattle, box number 124, and then so that's it's like the P.O. box, but just box number 214, and then the address of the building is 10002, so 3 zeros, 10002, Aurora Avenue North, Suite 36, Seattle, Washington, 98133. Also, if you make fan art, if you can make it, because usually 95% of the time people just make it of me in my head, because I'm such a dominant head when it comes to the Psychology Saddle YouTube channel, but and that's flattering and everything, but I like to put the fan art on the outside of my door, and when people come over, I'm like, this is
it's quite a bit of Kirk here.
Yeah, that's a lot of just my head, and so I'd love it if you included yourself. I mean, to me, it would be, because some people will, though.
Or other concepts too,
Yeah, and also you could include Berto, the other co-hosts.
Yeah, let's replace all of your heads with my heads.
Also, we are accepting applications to a scholarship, $3,000 for a graduate student in mental health who has already made a difference in the world and is planning on making a difference in the world and needs the money. Those are the 3 criteria. So go to the website and apply. Also, you don't have to be a listener to the podcast. So, tell everyone, advertise, the more the merrier. Also, Berto, you have a Cameo that people can get Cameo.
I'm on Cameo, the service, yes.
So if people want to get
I did one for someone in Iceland.
Ooh.
I sang a little bit of Bjork.
Oh.
It was a really sweet thing. It was for someone in their life that is older and was feeling down. And so they needed a pick-me-up.
Oh.
So.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd be really good at that. All right, let's take a break. Because we were talking in the Jodi Arias deep dive, which honestly might go down as the best series of episodes we've ever made.
You predicted it. I was like, I wasn't denying it. I was just like, okay. And
I did. I predicted.
You predicted. You told me when you were editing it. When you were editing, you're like, I think this is gonna be.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay.
I think the elements that I want to continue to follow the principles, because for a long time I always followed the principle that I don't like multi-part episodes.
Yeah, there is something to that, right?
Because it's annoying on your podcast feed to have multiple files that you have to listen to in sequence as opposed to just listening to one file. And so back in the day, if I did a deep dive that was 10 hours, I would just make it a 10-hour episode.
And they could pause it and come back to it, whatever.
Right. And you just know that you're in the sequence, right? And you know where to find it. And, because what if you end up accidentally listening to part 3 first? You're like, oh shit, this is part 3. It's just annoying. So I always follow that principle, maybe too rigidly. So breaking from that gives us the ability to have multi-parts. Also the ability to record over multiple days, because to fully go into something, and to be able to luxuriate within that freedom, because I didn't know how many parts it was going to be.
Right. And be also a bit fresh about it. Not because like if we had done it in a row, by the end, the quality might have suffered, right?
It did, tired. Arguably. Yeah. And I had to edit around that a little bit because, we recorded in 2 chunks. And so by the end of each of those chunks,
we get tired.
It was getting to be midnight around there. And, your brain doesn't work quite right by that point. And so, the other thing is to what I feel like every once in a while I get to this, but I feel like I really did with this one is my outline has to be in a certain format. There's a certain sequence to my outline that works better than others. Like when we did the Casey Anthony, my outline was good as an outline, but it wasn't good as a podcasting outline. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't optimized. I feel like the outline format that I followed with Jodi Arias was very good for podcasting for you and me. The other thing is as I was working on the outline, I had different ideas for segments, like I was like, okay, in this segment, I'm going to throw to Berto and I'd be like, okay, how would you have gotten away with it? And then, it's an interesting little tangent, that we could go on. Or why do you think this was popular in the first place? Let's go in that zone. So instead of me just sort of rambling on an outline, I have predetermined zones where Berto goes off, and that makes it easier and better. So, and I had fully nerded out on that topic, and you had already done it too. You had nerded out. We had both nerded out on the topic. So, and it was fresh in our minds. So we could off the dome just ramble about something from an expert position in a way that, and a lot of people, some super nerds of Jodi Arias are telling us like, this is the best commentary they've ever heard of the case. And,
that's crazy.
I doubt that that's true if you took all the commentary in the podcasting
But
world.
It's great that someone's getting that much value of it.
But I wouldn't argue that it's up there, in terms of what we can do. Also, another whole other part of it, which both of us have to monitor, is our energy level going into it.
Right.
We can't depend on our bodies the way we could 5 years ago.
15 years ago.
We have to get good sleep. We have to eat right that day. We have to make sure that we're in a good spot. I have to make sure I take a good nap in the afternoon. Things have to be optimized so that when it's go time, my brain is working correctly. And it was. The other aspect of it is on certain episodes, I'm being way more scrutinizing about editing it to make it be snappy and move quick.
Sure.
So I think that's another principle to it. I think there's a lot of other little details that I could bore people with, but I've already done that sufficiently. So, so I would like to do it more. Someone suggested that we do the Josh Powell case.
Okay.
We've already talked about it, I think. I know I've done episodes about it all the way back like 12 years ago or something. Because my colleague was a clinician that actually assessed Josh Powell in the moment.
Right.
And came on the podcast to talk about his story of assessment with Josh Powell and the shock that he went through having learned about the tragedy in the end. Oh. And so I have some secondhand knowledge from a firsthand knowledge person, right? And we haven't ever done like a full comb through.
So we could go through that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of interest there.
That one's traumatizing. All of these are traumatizing.
But the Utah chapter, when the family is still together, and then the disappearance of the wife.
By the way, parentheses, there was some feedback, I saw it more than once, that some folks said, oh, Berto sometimes laughs when there's something like you might have said like, oh, she killed him. And I was like, yeah, or something, like. It is true that my personality / reactions sometimes include a laugh. Maybe it's a bit of a nervous laugh, or maybe it's just like, that's how I am. But I want to clarify, I don't find murder funny.
No, I don't
find bad things funny. In reality, it's just sometimes I do find sarcasm and irony as a way to deal with life. And so I might be like, wow, that went well. Like,
yeah. Well,
ironically, sarcastically, but
that too. But if I were to add on to that, and I think it's totally fine, and I find it to be a positive thing. Anyone giving that kind of feedback, I'm going to take a guess and say that they haven't listened to you enough and they don't know you well enough.
Could be. So one of them was actually, it's like, I lost someone in my life to violent crime. I don't find it funny.
But a lot of people are against murder, and the vast majority of the audience, I'm guessing, doesn't see it that way. But I will say that the reason why it's positive is I am working my way through an outline and being kind of dry at times. And you're trying to liven it up, and you're trying to be a good wingman, essentially. And in the basketball broadcasting language, you're the color guy,
sure,
right? You're the guy that provides color. And so
if I was always like, I agree, that basket was good.
Right. So you have various different laughs
Yeah.
or other kinds of emotive bits or self-deprecating bits that keep it lighter and keep it moving. And
I am the worst at self-deprecation.
And so that's one of the most meta, best jokes you've ever said, actually. And I want to reward that. But, and I've noticed that too, because, when I'm editing it, I'm like, he does laugh at times when it's not like funny, but what you're trying to accommodate. It's a way of lightening the mood or softening the blow of what you're saying. And
how would you think that was gonna, like that kind of thing, where it's like, well, you're talking about a murder. It's like, I know.
Yeah,
it's not
what people can write in and comment below how they feel about it. But I'm guessing that most people are like, either I didn't notice or I did notice, but I see it as a positive thing. It's a good addition that he adds. But anyway, so I was thinking like this might be a new tradition that we can build based on the principles that we followed for the Jodi Arias series. Because the other thing is, I don't know about you, but those 6 chapters are some of the most satisfying content I've ever made.
It was very good to make that.
While we were doing it, I was like, shit, this is satisfying.
Well, because, so a lot of times when we talk about topics, I am just kind of reacting, right? And there's some fun in that. I like improv theater. It's fun, right? But when it's something I can also talk about with more detail, it's more fun for me, right? Because I can be like, well, actually, I heard this, I read this.
Right.
So yeah, that was great because I happened to, in the first one we did, I actually happened to already know a lot, like the Casey Anthony thing, right? But in this one, I went and like did my research too. So I was like, I was prepared with information, and it was fun.
So that was a principle that, and there's so many principles over the 15 years that I've learned that come together in various things that I do. But during the Casey Anthony episodes we did, I realized, because I operate on this assumption that you don't want to do homework.
Right.
Because a long time ago, literally in the first few months of us making this podcast, I was assuming all 3 of us, you, me, and Lita, were going to basically pull our own weight or do our own homework. And I remember, and I thought it was like a 3-person effort. I didn't think of it as my podcast that you were on. And so I would have these meetings with the 2 of you and be like, okay, how about you guys do this? And it wasn't that you would be like, fuck you, I'm not going to do that. But it just would never work out.
Right.
Because you would try to wing it too much, or you didn't really know the assignment or something. Or you might literally say, oh shit, I didn't prepare or whatever. And I didn't fault y'all for that. I just over time to say, oh, well, I guess I'll do the homework, And then I maybe tried a few more times over the years.
And that was very true because I basically was thinking about it at the time, like, this is a fun thing Kirk asked me to do. I'm mostly doing it because he's my friend.
Right.
And it's fun. It's fine. But I had a job, as I've always had, same job, right? And I was busy and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm like, I only have so much time. Right. But as the years developed and some of these opportunities start sprinkling in, it is fun. It's its own reward to prepare.
Yeah.
And you're like with that.
Well, but in the beginning, also, the podcast was so random. We were doing episodes We had one of the very first episodes we ever did was just reviewing barbecue restaurants in Seattle.
Right. And I will say,
so my point is that I can imagine from your standpoint, you're just like, well, where do I begin?
Sure.
There's no direction to this thing.
And there was something positive about you throwing me into the fire in many situations.
Right. Yeah.
Because and Lita was really good at this too. It's like just improv.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Improv.
Yeah.
And it makes it more interesting to the viewers, the listeners, because they know you're not prepared and you're acting off the top of your head. But so for many, many years, when I would be preparing for an episode for the two of us, I didn't hold it against you. I just always figured I would have to be the person that would present the information, and then you would be the one going, wow, that's interesting, and adding all the things that you add. When we were doing the Casey Anthony episode, I tried to do that, but I didn't have a lot of time, so my depth was shallow compared to you, but also just kind of shallow for the episode, really. I thought I was prepared.
I wouldn't say I was like an expert, but I just happened to have, that wasn't a case where I went and did my homework. I just happened to have deep dove on accident on it.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of info running around in my head. Whereas Jordy areas, I actually went and
purposefully,
did my homework.
yeah. So I thought I had enough information, but about halfway through the recording, I started realizing I don't know as much as Berto does about this. And my lack of knowledge is actually kind of dangerous because I'm assuming things about this case that are based on this. I knew to be a shady, biased documentary, but I didn't realize how shady or how biased it was.
Oh, right, because we were doing it based on that. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
And so
I came at it like, yeah, what a crazy doc, and you're like, I don't know, that's the thing I watched.
and I'd done other research as well, but not enough clearly. Yeah. And midway through the episode, I started being convinced by some of the things you were saying, and I was like, well, that kind of changes things in my head. And that's not the best way to podcast. It certainly isn't the format that we usually follow, where it's like dumb Kirk is learning shit as we're podcasting. So unless we literally set it up that way. Which
we did one recently about AI stuff, and that was good.
Yeah, that was dumb Kirk learning shit as we went along, and I did. But anyway, so in that episode, I learned, maybe Berto can actually do homework, and maybe he has time for that, and he can nerd out on something. So I don't know. I just feel like it'll be an interesting course that we might take now.
We should do it. I'm also a lot more responsible with stuff like that nowadays.
Right. Yeah. And I think I have yet to fully realize that. I mean, I know that intellectually. Like, one of the things that I know now is that when we podcast, you will be on time.
Right.
In the early days,
that was not true.
You were almost never on time.
Yeah. And sometimes it was very late.
Yeah. But now, when you say you're going to be there, or if I'm having a party or something and you'll be there, I know you'll be there, and you'll be there, within a reasonable kind of time frame. So maybe we can both sort of accept that you're a different Berto now, and you can do homework and stuff.
Yes,
because I think it really assists, because I don't catch everything.
Well, speaking of the whole influence and example, leading by example, because honestly, what happened over the years is I was like, oh, I see. Kirk does his homework. Like, Kirk is prepared to things. So if I'm going to participate in stuff with Kirk, I need to pull weight. Like, I need to like do whatever I need to do. And that was, something I learned over time. I was like, oh, okay. So to me, most of the time, it just meant like when I show up, even though I was late at first, when I show up, I'm not going to pull punches. I'm here. Mm-hmm. But then it's grown to like, all right, I can do homework. I can prepare more. Mm-hmm. I can,
And, the patrons do, literally give us money to spend that time away from other kinds of work that might make us money, it feels justified. It feels congruent. It feels good. It's a win-win, I think, that way.
So that sounds good. We should do that one.
I think that'll be interesting, because the other thing that people were saying, which I didn't really realize, is that we have a particular angle of commentary that not everyone might provide. There's a lot of different true crime
Sure, yeah.
podcasts, of course. And they have their own strengths and weaknesses, just like we would. And our strengths and weaknesses are in the direction that we have it. You know, like I will often try to conceptualize things based on trauma and schema and having compassion while also identifying really horrible. You know, I do have compassion for Jodi Arias. I do have conceptualizations that are, you know, recognizing that she probably went through some things. I don't excuse her behavior in any way at the same time, but you know, it's not frequent that you'll have true crime podcasts that will have that kind of angle. So, you know, people, if they're interested in Jodi Arias' case, you know, they might want to get that additional angle, and I think we can provide that kind of stuff. And that's not really new. I mean, we've done true crime here and there over the years. So, but I think it'd be interesting to kind of dedicate ourselves to doing really long, in-depth deep dives on some of these cases. And I'm looking forward to it because it gives me a chance, and maybe you a chance, to nerd out, have an excuse to be like, okay, I'm going to watch, you know, I don't know how many documentaries.
I do watch those types of content anyways, but it's always just for me, you know. But if I can actually, if we can actually put it to use for other people, that's great. Yeah.
Okay, so it's just me at the end of this episode because for some very strange reason, I did not record an outro with Berto, so I will just say it on my own. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of your brains so that you don't start losing your brains like I apparently am. And do that because you deserve it. You really, really do.